Hello, everyone. My name is Gilbert Resendez. I'm a Broadband Program Specialist here at NTIA. I just wanted to jump on here before we get our webinar underway. I see a number of folks are still joining our conversation that we're going to have today. I did want to bring to your attention that for a good chunk of this webinar, we will be playing a video which we have discovered is not audible if you are dialing on the phone bridge or using your phone as your audio source for this webinar. We're very sorry. We're working to understand more about what that technical challenge is. The solution that we have right now is to hear the webinar or the webinar video, you will need to download the GoToWebinar app onto your smartphone or smart device. It is available on the Apple App Store as well as the Google Play Store. That's the best solution that we have right now. Again, we're very sorry for this, but we have a temporary solution that looks like. There's more instructions on the screen right now, and we look forward to starting this webinar soon. Thank you very much.
Hello, and welcome to today's next installment of Broadband USA's NTIA 2021 Grants webinar series. My name is Gilbert Resendez, and I'm a Broadband Program Specialist here on the Broadband USA program. I support our state partnerships. Today, I will be your host and moderator of our Connecting Minority Communities Pilot Program webinar. Before I get started today, I do have a number of housekeeping items that I want to make sure I bring to everyone's attention before we get started. First, please put any questions that you may have in the questions box, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen in the webinar console. We'll be sure to take those questions and put them on our FAQ page once that's available. Next, we do have an overview of all of NTIA's grants, which were appropriated under the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2021 available on our website. Please consult that page for more information or questions that you may have on grant programs that we don't cover in today's webinar. Next, this presentation, a recording and a transcript of the webinar will be available on the Broadband USA website under the past events section on or before May 12th. And finally, as always, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to consult the Broadband USA website. That website can be found at broadbandusa.ntia.doc.gov or by emailing us at broadbandusa@ntia.gov. Today, I am joined by a number of my colleagues that I'd like to introduce to discuss with us the Connecting Minority Communities Pilot Program. First, I'm joined by Mr. Doug Kinkoff. Doug Kinkoff serves NTIA as the Associate Administrator of the Office of Telecommunications and Information Applications, or what we refer to as NTIA's broadband programs. Doug comes to us after a number of years in the telecommunications industry. Doug also served from 2019 to 2020 as the acting administrator of NTIA, and we're very lucky to have him here today. I'm also joined by my colleague, Scott Woods, who is NTIA's manager of the Technical Assistance Program for the Broadband USA. Scott comes to us with a number of years of working as a telecommunications attorney and joined NTIA under the BTOP program. I'm also joined by my colleague, Dr. Francine Alkaswani. Francine comes to us with a number of years of telecommunications and information policy experience, and even helped at her alma mater, Cheney University of Pennsylvania, when she led and won a grant to outfit the campus with telecommunications infrastructure. Last but certainly not least, I am joined by my colleague, Karen Archer Perry. Karen Perry comes to us with a number of years of experience in telecommunications policy, both from the private sector, nonprofit sector, and government. Karen worked for 20 years at Bell Labs, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the FCC working on the National Broadband Plan. Thank you to all of our panelists. Last, I'd like to go over today's agenda. First, we will hear from Mr. Doug Kinkoff about the Biden administration's plans for broadband. Next, we will pass it over to my colleague, Scott Woods, who will give us an overview of the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. We'll then pass it over to Francine, who will talk to us about some of the feedback that we heard from our stakeholders when we did outreach on the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. We will then turn it over to Karen Perry, who will discuss the publicly available broadband planning resources. And then we'll turn it back to Mr. Scott Woods, who will talk to us about the next steps in the Connecting Minority Communities program. Finally, we'll open it up to the participants for Q&A. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass it off to Mr. Doug Kinkoff.
Thank you, Gilbert. Good afternoon. I'm Doug Kinkoff, the Associate Administrator of NTIA's Broadband Programs. The quote on this page is applicable to all types of infrastructure, but I believe it particularly underscores the critical importance of broadband and the need to connect 100% of Americans. Connecting 100% of Americans to broadband is necessary to ensure all Americans have the opportunity to fully participate in the digital economy, whether that's utilizing distance learning, telehealth, launching home-based businesses, or helping communities attract new businesses. NTIA has always worked to connect Americans in one way or another since its inception. In connecting all Americans, we need to first focus on communities with the greatest need. And by connecting all Americans, we will support job creation, workforce development by ensuring Americans have access not only to broadband, but devices and digital skills. Now, to achieve this goal, it will require collaborations with states, tribes, industry, and federal agencies. And it will also require accurate data to inform these policies and investments. Today, millions of Americans don't have reliable broadband. 17 million Americans do not have access to basic broadband at 25.3 megabits per second. Nearly 21% of tribal lands and 17% of rural lands do not have 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload broadband. And while 95.6% of the households have access to 25.3 megabits per second broadband, only 68.9% of households subscribe to services at that level or higher. The map to the right, the red area indicates where wireline broadband service is unavailable at the basic FCC benchmark speed of 25.3. And this is based on the FCC Form 477 carrier report data. Now, broadband adoption is uneven across communities. 65 million Americans do not use the internet at all. 10 million internet users rely solely on mobile data plans. 5 million households not online identify cost as their main reason for not using the internet. Underconnected Americans are disproportionately likely to be low income, non-white, rural, tribal, elder, and differently abled. The map to the right, I think, highlights this issue. Red areas indicate places where more than 35% of the households in that area have no internet at all. And this is based on the American Community Survey data. So the issue is that it's time to now invest in the American workforce. 77% of all jobs require at least some technical skills. 48% of hiring managers say candidates lack the skills needed to fill open jobs. 29% of students without basic digital skills say they won't consider post-secondary studies. And more than 12 million households lack access to a computer, tablet, or smartphone. The map to the right on this page highlights residents without devices. And we know that the darker areas represent more than 30% of the households in that area lack access to a computer, tablet, or smartphone. And without those devices, those residents, those Americans have fewer opportunities to hone their digital skills, access educational opportunities, and advance in the workforce. The Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021 provided funding to NTIA to launch 3 grant programs. While these grant programs will not solve all the issues I've touched on, it's a good start in addressing the problem. The Tribal program is a $1 billion funded program, and it will be open to tribal governments, tribal colleges and universities, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands on behalf of the Native Hawaiian community, tribal organizations, and Alaska Native corporations. These grants will be focused on the deployment of adoption of broadband services on tribal lands and for programs such as remote learning, telehealth, and telework. The Infrastructure Broadband Program is a $300 million project. The Infrastructure Grant Program will be open to covered partnerships defined as states or one or more political subdivisions of the state and a provider of fixed broadband services. These will be competitive grants for infrastructure projects for the deployment of fixed broadband services that provide qualifying broadband services in an eligible service area. And finally, the Connecting Minority Communities is a $285 million program. And it's open to primarily HBCUs, historically Black colleges, universities, tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions. And you'll hear much more about this program here shortly. The grants under this program are for the purpose of broadband internet access or any eligible equipment or to hire and train information technology personnel. I would like to thank you for joining us here today. And now I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Scott Woods. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, for that introduction and overview. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Scott Woods, and I will be providing an overview of the eligibility criteria for the CMC pilot program. So as you recall from our previous webinar, we did an overview of the CMC. And this slide is just, again, an overview of just the basic information. As you all know, it's a $285 million pilot program. And who can apply? Historically Black colleges or universities, HBCUs, tribal colleges or universities, TCUs, minority serving institutions, MSIs, or consortiums that are led by HBCUs, TCUs, or MSIs that include either a minority business enterprise or a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. And for what? The CMC purpose is for the purchase of broadband internet access service or any eligible equipment, or to hire and train information technology personnel. For the educational institution, to facilitate educational instruction and learning, including through remote instruction, or for MBEs to operate the minority business enterprise, or for the tax-exempt organization to operate the 501c3 tax-exempt organization. And we'll have more details when we release the NOFO on specific purposes and allowable costs, et cetera, and that will be forthcoming. And again, we anticipate accepting applications for the pilot program in the summer of this year. And so I want to spend a little bit of time here talking about the eligible entities. So as again, the previous slide and this slide talks about HBCUs, TCUs, consortiums, and then the various categories of minority serving institutions: Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, Hispanic serving, predominantly Black, Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander serving institutions, ANAPISIs, or the Native American serving non-tribal institutions. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on the eligible criteria or the eligible entities to establish that criteria. So if you recall from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, for eligible entities, Congress directed NTIA to develop new methods to establish and to verify CMC eligibility. So we're going to talk about 4 of those, and one we're going to reserve, and I'll talk about that in a later webinar. But for today, we're going to talk about number 1. Our charge is to identify and verify that an applicant is an HBCU, TCU, or MSI. Number 2, Congress also directed NTIA to identify and to map those anchor communities that are within a 15-mile radius of each eligible HBCU, TCU, or MSI, and that meets the estimated median household income of not more than 250% of the poverty threshold. Number 3, in consultation with the Secretary of Interior, that we can determine a comparable maximum distance for TCU's anchor communities that are located in land held in trust by the United States, and to ensure that that is statistically comparable to anchor communities defined in the 15-mile radius that we talked about above. Number 4, identify which eligible recipients have the greatest unmet financial need. And number 5, verify that a designated MBE or tax-exempt 501c3 organization is applying as a member of a consortium is indeed an eligible entity for that consortium. So for the purposes of today, we're going to talk about number 1, number 2, number 4, number 5. The consultation with the Secretary of Interior is ongoing right now, and that will be used specifically for those tribal colleges and universities that are on land held in trust. So we're going to talk about those other 4, and we're going to hold in abeyance number 3 for a later date. So to establish and verify CMC eligible entities, we're going to rely on the Department of Education data, specifically the National Center for Education Statistics, as well as the Department of Education's eligibility matrix. As of right now, the 2020 version is available. So as you can see from this slide, the current number of schools are identified. So for HBCUs, there are 102. And again, you can verify that through the NCES database. For TCUs, the NCS database, we're going to use that to validate eligibility as well. But for specific categories of MSIs, the HSIs, Alaska Native and Native Hawaiian, the predominantly Black, Anapeesees, and the Native American serving non-tribal institutions, we're going to rely on the latest version, in this case, 2020 version of the Department of Education's eligibility matrix. So again, if you can see here on this slide, we have the current number of schools that are identified. That is, and that will represent the universe of eligible institutions in step 1 of our eligibility criteria. Next slide. So as you can see here, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on sort of prong number 2, which is the anchor community prong. And the Act defines anchor community as any area that is 1, not more than 15 miles from an HBCU, a TCU, or MSI, and 2, has an estimated median annual household income of not more than 250% of the poverty line. So we're going to test that through 4 prongs. Number 1, the 250% threshold will be determined for household size based on the 2019 poverty threshold data that's available from the US Census Bureau. Step 2, that 250% poverty threshold data by household size will then be applied to the average household size in each census tract according to the 2015 to 2019 American Community Survey data, also from the US Census Bureau. Step 3, utilizing the capabilities within our National Broadband Availability Map platform, a 15-mile buffer will be drawn around each eligible institution as described above. And then finally, a digital overlay will be used to select all census tracts for each anchor community boundary. The median household income in each anchor community census tract will be compared to the 250% poverty threshold as defined above to determine if the anchor community tract does not exceed the prescribed poverty threshold. So, okay, I know that's a lot. Got an example for you in the next couple of slides to show you how we're going to do that and indeed verify that anchor community status, okay? So first, the poverty threshold data, have a link here to the Census Bureau's, data table that we're going to use, and I'll show that in a second. And again, just reminding everyone that we're validating this criteria by creating the 15-mile buffer around each eligible recipient, and that will include median household data, average household size, and the poverty threshold for each individual census tract within that 15-mile buffer. right? So if you go to the Census Bureau and you look for their poverty threshold for 2019, here's what that table looks like. And again, we're using 2019 data because it corresponds with the annual median household income data from 2015 to 2019 that the census put out just recently. So we're comparing apples to apples, if you will, to ensure that the median income corresponds to the poverty threshold. So as you can see here, we've identified the weighted average threshold by size of the family unit that we're going to use to determine the poverty threshold for each census tract. And so what we've done here is just added that 250% calculation to each of those poverty thresholds. It's a simple multiplication, 2.5 times that weighted average threshold number. That's how you get the 250% poverty threshold, or not to exceed poverty threshold line for purposes of determining the anchor community eligibility. So what does this look like? This next slide is a visual representation, and this is hypothetical for our purposes for today, right? So for this, in this hypothetical urban area, right, we would draw the 15-mile radius around the institution, and then applying the poverty and annual median household factors, we would identify those census tracts indeed that would qualify. In this urban example, you see there are a number of different census tracts within that 15-mile radius buffer. In this case, in this hypothetical example, there are almost 200 census tracts that are identified in this 15-mile buffer radius zone. Again, if we were to extract this data into a table form, you would see here that for each census tract, we would have the median household income, the household size, the poverty threshold, and then a determination of whether it would qualify for the CMC pilot program or not. So for in this particular example, if you look at census tract 1, we have a median household income of $72,733. The average household size in that census tract is 2.61. We would bump that up to the 3 household size. So that poverty threshold level cap, if you will, would be $50,838. But since the median household income size is above the poverty threshold, that census tract would not apply. So again, in table form, again, what you would see is for each census tract, you have the corresponding household income data, the household size, the poverty threshold calculation, and then a determination of whether that individual census tract would indeed qualify under the CMC pilot. I would also add that for household size, that corresponding to the poverty threshold data, and this tracks with the CMC final rule, using between 2 and 3 household size as an example. If the household size was 2.5 or above, we would correspond that to a household size of 3 for poverty threshold determination. If it's under 2.5 or between 2 and 2.5, we'll correspond that data to the household size of 2, and that poverty threshold data 41,303. So again, and we detail this methodology and the rationale in the Act, and you'll be able to see that and walk that through. And more importantly, when we release the notice of funding opportunity, again, we will go into more detail on our method and our rationale of how we calculate anchor community eligibility. This next slide is a rural example. Again, hypothetical for our purposes today, but this is a rural example. Again, we have the school location, we have the 15-mile buffer. We don't have as many census tracts in this example. In this example, we only captured 9, but we're going to walk you through, again, what that would look like in table function. So this is the graphical illustration, and here is the table function extracted that data in tabular form. So again, you have your census tract number, the median household income, the corresponding household size, the poverty threshold calculation, and again, finally, a determination of whether that individual census tract would indeed qualify for the CMC pilot program. We'd like to add that all of this data is publicly available from the American Community Survey and the Census Bureau. And very shortly, my colleague will walk you through how you can access all of this publicly available data for yourselves, the individual data tables, the underlying rationale, and again, how to apply all of these data, the data sets, to those census tracts within your community. So stay tuned for that. That will be coming here very shortly. So next, we're going to talk about the consortium eligibility, particularly for minority business enterprises and 501c3 tax-exempt organizations. For minority business enterprises, it will be a self-certification process. That certification will be included in the notice of funding opportunity, so stay tuned for that. And for 501c3 tax-exempt organizations, the program office will check that status during that initial application review phase. And we're going to use the tax-exempt organization search function by the IRS via its website. So the IRS, has a search portal on its website, and we're going to use that portal just to verify and validate whether the organization in the consortium is indeed a tax-exempt organization under the IRS designation. So next, we're going to talk about the greatest unmet financial need requirement. And so what we've determined from the rule is, the Act has, Congress has directed us to determine which eligible recipients, have the students with the greatest unmet financial need. And so we're going to apply that eligible institution will include that information, has to include that information in their application for funding, to include any supplementary information to explain that data. And the data is really around 6 factors. Number 1, student population size. Number 2, the number and percentage of students that are eligible to receive federal Pell Grants. Number 3, the number and percentage of students that receive other need-based financial aid from the federal government, a state, or that institution itself. Number 4, number and percentage of students that qualify as low-income consumers. Number 5, the number and percentage of students that are low-income individuals. And number 6, the number and percentage of students that have been approved to receive unemployment insurance benefits under any federal or state law since March 1st of 2020. Okay, so when the applicant includes that information in the application, we'll review that information in the merit review phase, we'll analyze it, and then we'll do a rank order, if you will. The assessments will be ranked and compared across all submitted applications during the merit review phase, and then make a determination during program eligibility whether the data will in fact meet the greatest unmet financial need requirement. Again, no need to overthink this right now. We will go into more detail in the notice of funding opportunity, but we wanted to give you a preview of our method and rationale, and that's what we're doing today. So again, we'll be available to answer any questions about this, particularly in our technical assistance and outreach phase, and I'll cover that a little bit shortly in a little bit. So next, I want to talk about program requirements. So these are the fundamental program requirements as prescribed by the Act that we must do. Number 1, at least 40% of grant funds awarded will be made to historically Black colleges or universities. At least 20% of all grant funds awarded to eligible entities must be used to provide broadband access and/or devices and equipment to students. And so we have to ensure programmatically that those 2 prongs are met. For eligible recipients that specifically receive a grant to provide broadband internet access service or eligible equipments to students, those recipients must prioritize students who are in need, those students who are in need per the needs criteria factors. And we talked about those in the slide previous. And again, so when we do our merit review checks, again, we are checking to ensure that those applicants that have this specific programmatic function will prioritize those students who are in need in the application. If an eligible recipient will have a component of a purchase or a lease of equipment, those eligible entities again must prioritize any lending or providing of equipment to students and/or patrons who do not have access to such equipment. So again, we're prioritizing those individuals and students who are in need or who don't have access to that equipment. And then finally, we will build into the program evaluation and data collection requirements. We'll go into more detail in the notice of funding opportunity, but we are planning for these activities to be allowable costs. So again, that we're ensuring that we can properly evaluate and collect the appropriate amount of data to gauge the effectiveness of this program. So that's it for now. I want to thank you for your time and attention. Now I turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Francine Alkaswani, who will give an overview of our stakeholder outreach and feedback that we've conducted to date. Francine, over to you. And thank you everyone for joining us today.
Hello there. And thank you, Scott. You did a fantastic job of laying out the details for establishing the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. Now, we have had several outreach conversations regarding the pilot program with umbrella organizations that represent the eligible entities for the program. And these groups include NAFIO, AHEC, Thurgood Marshall College Fund, HAKU, and UNCF, as well as the telecom industry and other stakeholder groups. I would now like to share our responses to some of their questions. This should shed light on some residual questions that you might have as you think about developing grant proposals. First of all, a very important question. Will NTIA include innovation or innovative methods as a core component of eligible program activities? Absolutely, for sure. The Connecting Minority Communities Grant Program is a pilot program funded under the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021, and it is a spending bill that includes $900 billion in stimulus relief for the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, $285 million was allocated for the Connecting Minority Communities, which I'm going to shorten to CMC. And that bill is an extension of the CARES Act with regard to addressing the problems confronted by historically Black colleges and universities, by tribal colleges and universities, and minority serving institutions in response to COVID-19. Now, while the purpose is explicit, that is, the CMC pilot program will provide grants for the purchase of broadband internet access service or eligible equipment, or hire and train information technology personnel to facilitate educational instruction and learning, including through remote instruction. So I think you can see from the specified purposes of the grant what that intent is as related to overcoming COVID-19 and its effects on your campuses. Now, NTIA will be looking to institutions to provide a description of the problem that the institution seeks to address and how the purposes of the grants program, the use of these technologies and services, will help to solve those problems that you've identified. Since this is a pilot program, NTIA will be looking for innovative methods, innovative solutions to these identified problems that will serve as models, templates for replication, and that will be the basis for recommendations to the administration. So the short answer is, will NTIA include innovation or innovative methods as a core component of eligible programs and program activities? The short answer is yes, definitely so. Now, another question that has arisen is, what advice would you give to be best positioned to have a winning proposal? Well, let me say at the outset, I can't give you advice for what will be a winning proposal since these will be competitive grants and they will be reviewed. But we can give you some advice with respect to how to be more or less competitive with respect to them. So the first point is, does the proposal show how it is closing the gap left by CARES Act funding? Does it show how it will supplement Title III and other CARES Act funding? Now, what problems has your institution faced as a result of COVID that are a function of limited or non-existent broadband access? And how will this proposal solve that problem? What gap did it leave with respect to funding? What gap did it leave with respect to the needs of your institution meeting its mission and its goals? So what we ask that you do or suggest is to provide a clear statement of the problem, clearly articulate a program description that includes a solution to the problem, including your target population, the anticipated outputs, the short-term outcomes, because we know full well that outcomes, as typically defined, can only be expected to occur several years after full implementation of a project. What are your plans for sustainability? Provide a clear implementation plan. Include a thoroughly thought out evaluation plan. And give a detailed budget narrative that maps to the implementation plan. I want to underscore the relevance and importance of a budget narrative. That budget narrative should, in effect, be a description of what your project is. It should map very clearly to your implementation plan. Over the years, we've learned that a number of projects fall short in not being fully descriptive in the budget narrative component of a grant submission. So we're underscoring and underlying that point. Next, a question came up as to whether NTIA will focus on the best investments and best projects to ensure and demonstrate the CMC program success. That is a very critical point that has arisen, and the best means just that. The CMC is a pilot program, and we want to be able to support the development of stellar programs, of stellar projects that can serve as templates for replication, and that will provide evidence of success that will serve as a basis for recommendations to the Congress and to this administration for the future. So are we looking for and will we focus on best investments and best projects? Yes, because we want the best in order to demonstrate that this pilot program has been successful. Another question that often comes up, and I'm sure it's on all of your minds, will there be an evaluation and reporting requirement? Yes, indeed. How will NTIA effectively develop, track, and manage data collection, evaluation, and reporting methods? Well, first of all, an evaluation plan is a requirement of your project proposal, and you will be expected to submit a report of your evaluation at the closeout of the project. Your contribution in this area is extremely important. Accurate data is clearly what is needed in order to support our recommendations. Accurate data, reporting mechanisms, and the reports that you submit help inform this notion of an evidence-based program planning. It supports evidence-based reports and recommendations to Congress. So there will be a biannual reporting requirement and a report due after the end of the grant period. Additionally, I want to point out what NTIA's requirements are, and that your reports will help us meet our reporting requirements. So not later than 90 days after the end of the program, NTIA is required to submit to the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation of the Senate and the Committee on Energy and Commerce of the House of Representatives a report that describes the manner in which the pilot was carried out. This report must also identify each recipient of a grant. The report next must contain information regarding the effectiveness of the pilot. The data you submit in your biannual report and at your end of grant will help us to deliver on that requirement. So this report must also include lessons learned in carrying out the program and recommendations for future actions. So again, I'd like to underscore the point that your biannual reports, your evaluation reports, and the end of the grant reports will be the foundation for NTIA's reporting requirements. So we are counting on all of our grant recipients to meet those conditions. Another question that comes up is, what do we mean by a consortium? Well, as the legislation defines, that a consortium is a group that is comprised of one or another or more of the eligible institutions. It must be led by one of the eligible institutions. And furthermore, that consortium must include a minority business enterprise or a nonprofit, a tax-exempt nonprofit, I might add, and members of eligible institutions. So that's it in a nutshell. So by a consortium, we mean a group that is led by an eligible institution and that is comprised of minority business enterprise or a tax-exempt nonprofit and one or another or more of one of the eligible institutions. And my next point is pertaining to merit reviewers. Since NTIA is soliciting volunteer reviewers, which I think you've heard, what will be the time commitment for reviewers? Well, we anticipate reviewers will receive 12 to 20 proposals to review over a 2-week period. And we expect to then convene a panel that will discuss up to 2 to 4 hours that would facilitate final scores and address specific reviewer concerns. So we would expect that this would be the equivalent of about a week of time for each reviewer. And let me underscore here the fact that reviewers are volunteers. So we are soliciting volunteer reviewers for this commitment to help with the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. Now, we hope that these points will be of help to you as you think about projects you wish to develop for the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. I want to thank you so much for joining us today. So let's now go to Karen Perry for additional information that will be useful in planning and developing your proposals. So Karen, please take over now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francine. Gilbert, Scott, Francine, and all of us at NTIA are very excited to be with you today and to be supporting this program here at NTIA. I I want to remind you that we also welcome your questions. So please do put those questions in the chat box so that we can answer them at the end of the presentation. I want to come back to the objectives of this program, the ones that Scott and Francine have both mentioned. The program is about connecting minority communities through community anchor institutions. Of course, community anchor institutions are beacons for learning, but they're also engines for change in their communities. It's a mission that's important to me as well as important to their communities. And we believe that those engines for change can also be engines for connectivity. So we're very excited to be supporting a program that can drive that change in communities. I also wanted to remind you, this is not the only program that supports broadband that's happening right now. NTIA supports 2 other programs, one for tribal broadband and one for infrastructure. And there are other grant funds that are available through other agencies and through states right now. So please keep your ear tuned for other programs that might be available that would augment or complement this program if you have bolder issues than ones that are just covered here. My focus is to cover the 2 data sets that support this program. The first is from the National Center for Education Statistics, and the second is from the American Community Survey. From the National Center for Education Statistics, we really get the list of the colleges and universities that are eligible from the program. And from the American Community Survey, we get the underlying income eligibility. And so let me first talk about the National Center for Education Statistics. It's really an easy to navigate website where all you have to do is look up the type of college or university that you're interested in order to generate a list and see if your community is on that list. And so the first list I wanted to highlight is where you could search for HBCUs. And I've just really put this here so that it's easy for you to find the website and go directly to that list. The second one is where you would look to find information on tribal colleges or universities. And the third one is a little bit more, it takes a little bit more digging, but for the additional minority serving institutions, you have to go to look for a slightly more detailed list, but they're also quite easy to find. The American Community Survey is really actually a much more comprehensive data set. We're only using a tiny piece of it for our eligibility as defined by the statute. But I wanted to describe the data set a little bit more fully for you so you had a larger context. So the American Community Survey is conducted on a rolling basis. So every year, the US Census Bureau goes out and asks a number of questions to people to better understand our communities. And the questions are social, housing, and economic questions. And while we're going to use pieces of that data as a qualifying element of this program, you might find other elements of this data set useful in your planning, both for this project and for other work you do. So there's information about education level, employment status, computer and internet subscriptions, as well as economic information about business, occupation, people's work and type of work, race, ethnicity, and Hispanic origin, and housing unit and living situations. So I wanted to highlight that the data set is rich in an awful lot of ways, and it is a very robust data set. So it is the largest random sample survey that is conducted by the US Census Bureau. And by large, I mean large. So the Census Bureau surveys 3.5 million households every year. And they do it on a rolling basis such that they reach 17 million households over a 5-year basis. And with that sample size of 17 million households, they're able to make estimates for all 3,142 counties for tribal areas, for population areas down to 20,000 people, and that's in their 1-year estimates. And then in their 5-year estimates, they're able to get down all the way to the block group level and the tract level. Okay, so what's a block group and what's a tract? So the smallest area that the census kind of tracks is called a census block. And a census block in a city looks like a block. It's like 200 or 300 people. In a rural area, it maybe is 10 square miles. And in the state of Alaska, a census block might be about the size of the state of Delaware. So a block is really not defined by geography. A block is defined by a number of people. But in many cases, a block is a lot like a neighborhood. And so from a planning basis, it is a pretty decent kind of a planning unit. And because this data is at the block or the tract level, it can be very, very helpful from a planning basis. The other thing that's pretty marvelous about this data set is it gets refreshed every year. So the data that we're working with right now is the data that covers that planning period from 2015 to 2019, and it was released on December 10th of last year. And we'll get a refresh on that data on December 9th of this year. And it covers that whole range of topics, including the income data that we're looking for, as well as the housing size, as well as that information on computer and internet use. It's also quite easy to get access to it. In addition to having APIs so that you can download the data if you have a GIS system and you want to be able to manage it that way, it also has a very easy to use interface that you can really just type in numbers or words and pull data out of it. And that's called data.census.gov. I'm going to do a little demo today and show you how to use that. You can just type words into data.census.gov to get data, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the steps that you need to take to get the precise information that you need for eligibility. Now, I'm not going to walk through the steps that I've listed here on this chart, and there are two charts like this. I've listed them here for a reference so that you can get to them later. And I'm referencing two specific tables. The first table is a table on median household income. And so this will get you to that median household income table and allow you to dig down into that median household income to the tracts in your community. And the second table is about average household size. And so this will allow you to get down to average household size and to look at that average household size either in a table format or in a map format. And so that's what all of those steps will allow you to do for yourself. And as I said, I'm going to do a demo. You're going to have this on tape so you can do it yourself. Now, computer and internet subscription information is not an eligibility criteria for this grant. However, it is an eligible expense for this grant. And because there's wonderful data in the American Community Survey on computer and internet subscriptions, I wanted you to have easy access to that table information as well. And you use the same type of steps to get that information that I've shown you in the previous slides. And so the table number that you might find useful there is S2801. It's actually a much richer table than the two tables that I've just shown you. And so there's a little bit more exploring that you might want to do around that table, but you use very similar steps to kind of dig into those tables. There's a few more drop-down pages, but very similar steps to look at those two tables, and a huge amount of information that you can find using those tables that might be helpful when you're thinking about where you might want to go with your grant application and with your work. We've also done a number of webinars and provided a lot of technical assistance in the past, and we will do it again in the future around other tools to access broadband data. Before I give you a demonstration of the American Community Survey data.census.gov tool, I wanted to mention a number of other tools that are available that you might be able to use to support your broadband planning. This is kind of a survey of some of the tools that we frequently highlight in the area of broadband planning tools. And we've recently done a couple of great webinars that highlight many of these tools. Our February webinar included two wonderful speakers from MLab and Ookla who talked about their speed test capabilities and provided demos of those. And I also presented on that webinar and gave a demonstration of the American Community Survey Quick Facts tool, as well as the Internet as Infrastructure I3 Connectivity Explorer. The June 2020 webinar included an overview of the I3 Data Explorer tool and also a presentation from the US Census Bureau on the American Community Survey, data.census.gov. We haven't recently done a demonstration of the Broadband Now tool, but it is an extremely easy to use tool. It's a very consumer-friendly view and includes a survey of broadband service providers. So I really recommend that if you have time, you kind of check out those webinars and look at those tools if you're looking for a kind of a broader view of tools to look at broadband. We also will be providing additional technical assistance throughout the grant period and beyond. So we will be around to help you out if you need more information on broadband tools and broadband data. Now, let me turn to the data.census.gov tool and give you a demonstration of how to zero in on the precise data that you need in order to understand the qualification criteria for this grant program. So, as I mentioned, the data.census.gov tool is an extremely powerful tool. And as you can see, what it says here is just enter something in the search engine. So you just find tables, maps, and more. So you can really just put into the search engine a word that is kind of consistent with the type of data that's in here and a place name like your town, your city, or your county. But we pretty much know what we're looking for here. So what we're going to put in is we're going to put in B19013 because that is the name of the table that we want. And that's median household income in the past 12 months. And it's given me, I want to see the whole table. So I'm going to go up here to where it says table, and I'm going to press that. Actually, I want to see the navigation bar on the left. So I want to make sure I have access to that bar. Now I'm going to go up here to this little drop down up here on the upper right-hand side. And though this says here is 2019 one-year estimates, and that's the product that we're looking at in the US Census Bureau. And I don't want the one-year estimates. I want the 5-year estimates for 2019. And remember, the reason I want the 5-year estimates is because if you look over that 5-year period, you have the opportunity to have more granular data. And I want to go down to the track level. So I always want to tell it that I want that 5-year data estimates. Now, right now, I'm looking at data for the entire US, and I know the median income for the entire US was $62,000, and that's not going to help me very much. So I need to filter down to something a little bit more specific. So I'm going to go up here to the filter button and hit filter. And then I know I'm going to look at a geography. So I'm going to start by saying geography. And in the end, I know that I'm going to look at track level data. So I'm going to ask for tracks. And I'm going to take you somewhere in Alabama, because then I don't have to scroll too far down. So I'm going to go Alabama, and I'm going to go to Mobile County. And within Mobile County, I'm going to look at all of the census tracts within Mobile County. Having made all of those selections, I'm going to go up here to the upper right and hit done. So I've got geography. I'm telling you that the geography I'm looking for are tracts. I'm going to pick my county, and I'm going to hit Mobile County. I'm going to hit all the tracts. If I wanted to look at 2 counties at the same time, I could look at 2 counties. Now, at first glance, this doesn't look that much different, but if we roll across, you can see I now have the median household income for all of the tracts in Mobile County. And I have it in a table format, but I really want to see it in a map format. So I'm going to go over here to map and hit map. I'm going to move this over just a little bit. And I'm really interested in the city, not really the whole county. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And now I can look track by track, and I can see that the median household income in this track was 27,000, 30,000 in that track, 28,000 in that track. So I can look track by track, and I can look at the median household income. But remember, that's not the only piece of information I need. I need a second piece of information to determine eligibility, and that is I need that household size. So for that household size, I'm going to go just up to that same search bar, and I'm going to type in another table number. That's B25010. And you can see it's telling me that that is the average household size. And I'm going to hit enter. Right here, while I'm still in the same bar, I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to zoom a little. And so you can see that track I looked at before, the household size is 2.66. That one up here was 2.97. Downtown, 1.42. So big difference in the household size. So you can look track by track at your household size. Now that might not be the most convenient way to look at it, so you might want to go back to your table view. And of course, you can also download the data. In order to download it, you're going to hit the download button, select the table here. You're not quite done. You have to go back here to download selected. And then again, you need to tell it that you want the 2019 data and that you want the 5-year data. I'm a little bit stalled here, but you can make selections here. You want it on the PDF, the CSV, or and what year you want it for. I'm going to drop this right now, but that gives you a quick overview of how to get the precise data that you were looking for in the American Community Survey data.census.gov. Now I'm going to hand it all back to Scott so that he can give you some wrap-up information on the CMC program. Scott?
Thank you, Karen, for providing an overview of the publicly available data sources and a wonderful demo that applicants can use to access their own data in their location. So what I'm going to do on these next few slides is really go through sort of our next steps. So right now we are pending, we're waiting Federal Register publication of the CMC final rule. Again, clearance and publication is in process right now. So as soon as that is done, we'll be ready to roll on to the next phase. We're going to do immediately a call for merit reviewers, and I will go into some detail on that in the next slide or two. Followed by that, we'll have the clearance and publication of the notice of funding opportunity, and that will provide all the essential details to the potential applicants and eligible recipients about the program. All of the details that you will need to apply will be in the NOFO. And then we'll open up our pre-application technical assistance and stakeholder outreach. We'll open the CMC application window. That'll be clearly defined in the NOFO, so you'll have all that information. We'll have a merit review and programmatic review phases. Again, that's all will be spelled out in the NOFO. And then finally, notice of acceptance and the project funding will actually come from the grants office or the grants officer for this project, which is the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST, and NIST will be serving as the grants officer for the CMC pilot program. So those are sort of the next upcoming steps, the next immediate steps that we'll be embarking upon, again, after the publication of the CMC final rule. Next, I'm going to briefly talk about our call for merit reviewers, right? So we're ramping up this pilot project and we're seeking qualified broadband use and digital inclusion experts with experience in at least one of the following areas: telemedicine, telehealth, distance learning, broadband adoption, including specifically digital inclusion programming, including equipment, networks, training, and outreach, right? If you have experience in telework, workforce development, online entrepreneurship programs, we want you to volunteer to serve as a merit reviewer. Again, all of our criteria that we're looking for, the experience that we're looking for is on this slide in the checks. Please, please, please consider applying to be a merit reviewer for this program. So what we're planning for right now is the merit reviews will start in August and probably extend through and into October. Again, we are committed, to ensure that our merit reviewers come from diverse backgrounds and from all areas from the US. To volunteer, please send an email with a resume containing the following information to grantreviewer@ntia.gov, and make sure that resume has your name, your residence, including city and state, a good email or phone number to contact you, any employers, including the states that you were employed in, your current position and title, including previous positions and titles, and the number of years and types of experience and positions in this field related to broadband activities that you possess. Again, we need all that information to conduct a preliminary conflicts check, but also will help us make that determination for which merit reviewers indeed will be on the merit review team moving forward. Also want to note that although you will not be compensated for your time and expertise, again, this is a volunteer merit review program, you will be making a significant contribution to this program. Again, this is a new program, CMC pilot program, has never been done before. We're embarking on new territory. So you will have an opportunity to be on the ground floor, if you will, to review those applications to ensure that we get quality applications to be able to move forward with the CMC program. So again, if you have this slide, further information is available. If you click that link, that will take you to our website with information regarding our merit review process and our overall call for merit reviewers. Again, not just for the CMC pilot program, we're also calling for merit reviewers for our tribal program, as well as the broadband infrastructure. But I'm here with a specific call for merit reviewers for the CMC, the Connecting Minority Communities program. So with that said, I want to thank you again. I want to turn it over to our moderator of the day, Gilbert Resendez, who will facilitate the question and answer session. So thank you, everyone, and we look forward to your questions. Gilbert, over to you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Oh, I think we fixed that echo problem. Thank you very much, Scott. And thank you to our other panelists, Doug, Karen, and Francine. Like Scott mentioned, we do have a number of questions in the chat, and I tried to organize them while they were coming in by category to ask you as well as Karen and Francine. So the first set of questions are more logistical questions about the structure of this webinar series. Now, some people come in late, so I just wanted to make sure that we talked about those. Karen, I know we have a webinar today on CMC and a webinar tomorrow on CMC. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about what the difference is between today's session and tomorrow's session.
I really like it that I get to start off with the easy questions before you hand Scott all of the hard ones. So today's webinar and tomorrow's webinar has the same basic content to get started, but we'll all be here live to answer any new questions that you've got. So the same overall question to get started, but live Q&A both days. But next month, we'll have new content for you, and we're hoping to go into more information in order to help you develop your grant applications. And we're also hoping that the rules and eventually a NOFA will be published so that we'll be able to really answer all of the questions that you really have in very, very much more detail.
Great, thank you. And I know some people have been asking in the chat about webinar slides and when those will be available, perhaps a transcript. Can you talk a little bit more about when or what our timeline is that we normally pass those on to folks?
Well, usually we have the slides, transcripts, and videos available in 1 week on our website. And we were very ambitious when we said we would do 1 webinar a week, every week for 3 weeks, then take a break and then do it again. And so we're asking our Office of Public Affairs and team to review an awful lot of material right now, and we have not quite made our 1 week deadline. So they should be available within a week on our website, but some people have also noted that we're running a little bit late on that. So they'll be available roughly within a week on our website, and it will be the slides, the video, and a transcript of all of the material. We're aiming for a week, but we're just running a tiny bit late on it for some of them.
Thank you. And then final question before I pass some hardball questions to Scott. Where could folks learn more about Broadband USA, other programs that we may have or be administering, or where can they direct those questions or find more information online?
Well, there's 2 parts to this answer. One is you can always send us an email to broadbandusa@doc.gov. And it's a couple of things that you might want to write to us about. One is if you have any additional questions. And the other thing is if you have feedback for us about things you want us to cover in these webinars, because we do really appreciate your feedback. The other thing is to come to our Broadband USA website. And I also wanted to point out that we just upgraded our website. So some people have pointed out that there might be a couple problems with some of the links that were in last week's slides because of that website upgrade. So we'll put a couple of links in the chat for those data webinars so that you've got the upgraded website links. But also do come back to our Broadband USA website frequently because we are posting new information quite regularly.
Great. Thank you very much, Karen. Scott, I want to address the next large chunk of questions about the program structure. I know, like Karen mentioned, we don't quite have a NOFO yet, so we may not be able to answer a lot of these questions in the fullest depth that some folks would like right now, but we'll go ahead and ask some of them. First off, is from start to finish of NOFO publication to funds getting out the door, do you have an idea of what that timeline looks like yet?
Yes, thank you for the question. Karen gets all the softball questions, so that's pretty applicable. That's a good question. Like programmatically, we're planning for about a 90-day window, but again, that's we have to consult with the grants office / grants office of the project, and those consultations are just underway. But that's what we're planning for. Hopefully, a 90 to about 120-day turnaround. But again, more information. I know you're going to hear this like a broken record. More information will be provided in the notice of funding opportunity. We're working on that. Just how the act was structured. We have to go to the final rule first, which is statutory codification of the program, as well as the Office of Minority Broadband Initiatives, and then we'll get to go to the clearance and publishing of the notice of funding opportunity. But to answer the question, that is what we are planning for, and also reserve the right to make changes as we move forward.
Sure, thank you. I know a number of grant programs have matching requirements, and the question that came up during this webinar is, will our CMC pilot program have a matching requirement?
We're reviewing those details as we speak. Obviously, we understand the need. We also understand the financial burden of match at this time, particularly with the target schools and communities that are impacted. So we're weighing those options between having a match and not having a match. And again, we'll address those in the notice of funding opportunity, as well as our ongoing stakeholder outreach and technical assistance plan as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Another question that came up, and we talked a little bit about at various points in this webinar, is can organizations work together to build an application? I know you talked a little bit about consortiums. Can you talk any more about that?
Yes, we actually encourage that, but again, there are eligibility restraints and requirements, and Francine talked about those in terms of being members of consortiums. They have to be led by an HBCU, TCU, or MSI, and it can include an MBE, minority business enterprise, or a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. So that is the universe upon which those partnerships can happen, given the eligibility criteria that's contained in the Act. But yes, we do encourage collaborative approaches, as Francine talked about, innovative approaches to solving and addressing these issues as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I know a term that maybe some people may not be too familiar with that we talked about a lot is Minority Serving Institution, or MSI. You talked a little bit about how those institutions are defined in the presentation, but I didn't know if you could talk more about where we pull that definition, or where maybe people looking to build an application can find more information on their own.
Yes. Francine, you want to take that, or you want me to take it? I'll take it. She's on mute. Generally, it's the Higher Education Act of 1965 sets those. As we laid out in the presentation, we're using the Department of Education's guidelines, particularly the eligibility matrix. Karen covered the link to that 2020 eligibility matrix that we'll be using, as well as the National Center for Education Statistics. So we've reached out to representatives from the Department of Education, and again, on their website, it's the methodology and rationale for how those are defined, as well as you can go back to the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and they also reference the source documentation for how those institutions are defined as well. But they all relate back to the Higher Education Act of 1965, as well as current programmatic designations by the Department of Education.
Great, thank you. I'm not sure if this question is for you or Francine, who'd be the best person to address it, but does this program, the CMC pilot program, apply to college-age students only, or does it have a broader audience or service population?
So yes, the priority is for college-age students, but again, under the consortium, there are in the anchor community definition and rationale, there is some room, if you will, to address patrons, to address community-based programming, and again, we'll address all of that in the NOFA. I know that's the standard answer, but again, we look forward to conducting outreach and really getting ideas from potential stakeholders and eligible recipients, and we'll be working with you on that. I do want to reiterate now, Dr. Francine has always talked about this as well. This is a pilot program. And so the authorizing act, the Consolidated Appropriations Act, is both specific and ambiguous, and it gives the program office, we have some leeway in how to structure this. So again, we'll be working with not only our subject matter experts here at NTIA, but as we conduct and continue to conduct outreach to our stakeholder community to get input on that.
Great, thank you very much. Francine gave a very good overview of a lot of the input that we'd accept or taken in already from some of those stakeholder groups. So thank you to both of you. Regarding greatest unmet need, I know, Scott, you talked a bit about in the presentation about criteria that NTIA will use to evaluate greatest unmet need. Are any of those criteria weighted more or less over the others? Does NTIA take a very holistic view? Can you talk a little bit more about how we're going to look at those pieces of criteria?
Yes, I mean, they're not going to be weighted, and we're going to look at them as a whole. And as I stated, if you recall on the slide, each of the applicants will have an opportunity to provide a narrative and supplementary information that really explains and frames their greatest unmet financial need, and that will be taken under consideration. But to answer the question directly, no, they won't be weighted. We'll take them into consideration as a whole.
Great, thank you. Let's see here. I know RDOF funding is something that many folks have been talking about lately and recently. Will there be any limitations applying, will RDOF cause any limitations when applying for the CMC pilot grant?
Hey, that's a good question. I mean, RDOF is a totally different program, infrastructure program governed by the FCC. So this has a different program, a different programmatic scope and purpose. There is a provision, though, however, in the Authorizing Act that we have to conduct some interagency coordination with other funding agencies to ensure that there's not a duplication of let's call it similar programming in those areas. And so that we're actively doing that, and that's actively underway. But in terms of scope of an RDOF, which is purely infrastructure, no, it would not prohibit if an area received RDOF funding for infrastructure expansion, it would not prohibit them from going after CMC funds. Again, CMC funds is for a specific programmatic purpose, and we don't anticipate and won't include, infrastructure type activities under the CMC program.
Excellent, thank you.
There's a good question here, and I don't know the answer to it, but I want to pose it because I think it's one we should think about. And the question is that we're in a new census tract, and the tract level data for this person's tract is, quote, all messed up. In particular, they say that the median income data is very poor. What can we do about that? And I think we know that although the census data is very good, that really when you get down to the tract level data, it is imperfect. And your community view is important on that. And so if you believe that the tract level data is, quote, all messed up, I think that it doesn't happen really often, but it does happen sometimes. There is a plus or minus factor on tracts. And if you feel that it's all messed up, and if it does affect your eligibility, I think we will have to figure out a way to think about that. So I don't know what the answer is, but I appreciate you raising that issue, and we will think about that in our program design, I'm sure. So thank you for pointing it out.
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question, like Karen said.
There's a number of questions which I do believe we will be deferring to the NOFO, and those are questions about the size of each grant.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I was just about to pose that to Scott, although I think, like Karen alluded to, the answer may we'll wait to see what the NOFO and how it's addressed, but can you give any sort of indication or as to what size grants may be, how many number of awards that we're expecting to announce, and so forth?
Not at this time, unfortunately. We don't want to be prescriptive. Again, we have $285 million, and from the program side, we want to ensure that we're making the greatest impact that we can with the funds, and being responsible with those as well. So, we've had some preliminary discussions, but none that I would feel comfortable or authorized to share, because we just we'll address that all those programmatic details in the NOFO.
Here's an interesting one. If you receive applications from more than one applicants in my state, can you put me in touch with those people so that I could maybe collaborate with them?
That's a good question. I want to bring Dr. Akaswani in on this. One of the things that we're working on as far as our stakeholder outreach and ongoing technical assistance is, again, preparing for collaboration and actually encouraging collaborative approaches using some of the umbrella organizations that we've already had stakeholder outreach and discussions with. So, again, this is just a first step in that outreach and engagement process. So we encourage collaboration, we encourage innovative approaches, and plan to, address these issues with our ongoing outreach and assistance to the stakeholders involved. Dr. Francine, you have something you want to add on that?
Well, I think it ties into another question here about whether or not you can be an applicant, if you're eligible to be an applicant on more than one grant award. But first I'll go back to the collaboration issue. Once the grants applications are submitted, I don't think that would be the time to think about collaboration. The time is now. to start thinking about that. And that is what our outreach and some of our webinars and some of our other teleconferences will address, or we hope provide a platform for developing these collaborative arrangements. But the collaboration could take many forms, such as a consortium, in which you might be, your school might be the primary recipient, not just recipient, but the one who has submitted the proposal for an award, but you are also, or some other element within your school is a partner in a consortium for a grant award. So there are probably many relations and arrangements and ways for collaboration that could emerge in that regard. But we do encourage collaborations, very much so. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think we're pretty much time for the wrap up, aren't we?
Yeah, I think we are. I just had a couple questions I wanted to direct at the panel real quick regarding merit reviewers, since that was an important part of this process. How can people volunteer? Where can they get more information or express interest in volunteering for that, or the assistance for merit reviewing, and what sort of time commitment can individuals expect? I'll open it to whoever of the three of you would like to answer.
I think we talked about the time commitment. If I recall correctly, we mentioned that there is about a 2-week period that folks would have to for review of proposals, and that they would be expected to review anywhere from 12 to 20 proposals, and be prepared for a long commitment of time for intense review. These are,
Sure.
I think over the years we've learned that these are very intense sessions, and
Sure.
will require quite a bit of time.
And I would add too, just the important thing is to apply, right? And we will do our best to and make sure that we will have the appropriate, guidelines and processes in place so that you will know exactly what is expected of you, the time frame involved. We will handle all of that. We have a group that's, sole responsibility is developing those processes for the merit review teams. But right now, the important thing is that you apply. Please apply, be on a groundbreaking merit review team so that we can really kick this CMC program off the way it should be. So thank you for that question. We look forward to those merit review.
And those group sessions will be virtual. In prior years, it would be on site with group sessions, but we forego that and go the virtual route this year.
Great, thank you. And to remind myself, the email for individuals who are interested or who would like to apply or would like more questions, that is meritreviewer@ntia.gov. Is that correct?
Grantreviewer@ntia.gov. Yes.
Great, thank you. So if folks have more questions on the merit reviewer subject, please email grantreviewer@ntia.gov. I know we're approaching the top of the hour now. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I would like to say thank you to our panelists that we have here today. Like Karen mentioned, and I mentioned at the top of the webinar, a copy of these slides, a recording, and the transcript will be available on the Broadband USA website under our past events section. Our website is broadbandusa.ntia.doc.gov, and you can always email us at broadbandusa@ntia.doc.gov. There's those there for you if you'd like, and thank you for everyone for attending.
Thank you, Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you.